back for another edition of the Starting 502 podcast. As always, your host of the Most Pressing Meyer, Jacob Lane, J-Man in the house. We also got a very special guest joining us today. We'll hold off on the introductions until a little bit later. Andrew Zoldan from Inside TBT Podcast is going to be joining us. First things first, a little housekeeping. Talk a little Louisville basketball before we get into the TBT. First things first, though, Jacob, how are you? Are you surviving the heat? Are you good? You don't look too sweaty.
Not right now, no. But I 7-8 shirts in 2 days is when you know that the heat is a real problem. So very sweaty, but I'm doing good. Glad to talk some basketball. Definitely some things to talk about. And I'm excited to get back into Freedom Hall in a couple of weeks for TBT. It's going to be a good time.
It's going to be, as the kids say, litty.
Oh, it's going to be so litty.
It's going to be litty.
Turnt? They say turnt still?
I think they say turnt. I think it's permissible to say turnt, but there's that. Before we get into TBT, though, I mean, I would say Louisville's roster is still a little bit in flux, and that's kind of the first thing I want to get into really quickly. Louisville's entire roster is on campus. They've been working out, with the exception of one very big piece in Ty-Laur Johnson. Ty-Laur. I'm a little concerned. I'm a little concerned about Ty-Laur because I think that people were just relieved to see that Louisville got another point guard in the offseason, whether it be a sixth-year senior or a reclass junior to a high school senior incoming freshman. Like, I think people were just relieved to see that Louisville had another ball handler in case the Sky Clark experience doesn't work out. But as of right now, as far as we know, Ty-Laur Johnson, I don't know if it's an eligibility issue. I don't know if he's still finishing up some classes. Not exactly sure what's going on there, but Jacob, any thoughts on Ty-Laur Johnson and where does Louisville go if this doesn't pan out?
Well, it's interesting. I want to first kind of backtrack a little bit because you made a comment about in case the Sky Clark, experiment doesn't work out. And I want to kind of caveat that by saying, really, the way that it's not going to work out is if he becomes L. Ellis and there is nobody to back up. Obviously that was the major flaw last year from the guard position, was that it was just such a steep drop to Hersey Miller to Fabio Basili. So this year, a guy like Ty-Laur Johnson is going to be a bit of a step up, if you will. Definitely still a learning curve from a point guard. Still a lot of the responsibility on Sky, but Ty-Laur was going to obviously relieve some of that stress and pressure, goodness gracious, man, and allow for Sky Clark to get some rest and be able to be more efficient. So it's concerning that he's not here, but summer school just started this week, the last session, and that's how you got a guy like TJ Capers on the football side enrolling for the fall semester, which will get started in the early part of August. There's still time to enroll and get here, all of those things. So I don't think it's necessarily a major, like, sound the alarm type of deal today, but I do think it is concerning that a guy who's ranked 77th in the country is going to be a 4-star guard coming in, likely going to have an impact. And when you talk about the freshmen and where they shake out, I know you're really high on him being an impact player. And regardless of whether you think he's going to be that or just a slightly better version of last year, which is just all they really need, it's concerning, man, because there's not enough ball handlers, right? And we get back into this same conversation we had last year of, Karan Davis can handle the ball. And I do think he is going to probably end up being the ultimate backup point guard. So, kind of exclude him. But, Trenton Flowers, the some of the other names Trey Whites, right? These other guys that are coming in. We heard last year how all these players were going to be ball handlers, but when the pressure was on, nobody wanted to handle the ball. They fumbled the bag every time. And so this year, even if you have guys like Trey White playing guard for limited minutes, that's totally fine. But you do not want them coming out of what they're good at to try to take on something as a bigger responsibility that has a huge impact on getting an offense starting. No, you want somebody that has instinctual point guard offensive abilities to be in there. And I'm not necessarily saying Ty-Laur Johnson's going to come in and set the world on fire. He's more of a scorer than a passer, but you need that. You need that really bad. And that's a major concern.
I think that it matters less now than it did 10 years ago or even 5 years ago to have the true point guard. Like, I think that is going away in a sense, but the college game is a bit different than the international game or the NBA game, where, in the NBA, it's pretty much, there's very few Chris Pauls left out there, right? Like, there's very few Russell Westbrooks that are a true point guard. Like perfect examples, you look at the Celtics, you look at the Lakers, you look at the Nuggets, like a lot of these teams, that were really successful in the league because of the spacing and because of the shorter shot clock and because of the longer game clock and the way that they call fouls and the way that the game is spread out and it's more everybody is a distributor and a ball handler unless you have one guy initiating the offense, quarterbacking, if you will. That's still kind of a thing in college. And we saw last year when you don't have a guy who can quarterback the offense, just how ugly it can get. I mean, and trust me, it got ugly last year. Sky Clark does have experience playing, heavy minutes. Like people talk about he doesn't have a ton of experience, but when he played quite a bit at Illinois last season, averaged 25 minutes a game. So I think if Louisville can probably get 28 to 30 minutes a game out of Sky Clark, but I don't know. Do you trust Karan Davis and Hersey Miller filling in the rest of those minutes, or is it I think Ty-Laur Johnson was kind of the perfect fit there. I mean, a true New York City style point guard. Maybe not a guy that's going to come in and set the world on fire, but a guy that can come in and not just be
spark
passive.
Yeah, and spark, right? I mean, the most frustrating thing for me last year was when Hersey and Fabio were in. No, they didn't want the ball. They didn't want to dribble. They wanted to pass the ball as soon as they got it. It was like it was almost like as if they were scared of that moment. And look, these guys are college basketball players. They're definitely not. But you want somebody like that has that confidence and can spark it off the bench and just go out and one night, like I told you, my prediction for him was that he was going to be like one big time Joker in the Thief set off type of moment where he goes for 20 and a half, just something stupid like that. Like that's what he does. And that's what he's capable of. And without him, I think Kenny has a lot of confidence in Karan Davis. We're going to get into that when we talk about this interview that he did with John Rothstein. I think Kenny believes that Karan Davis can play the point guard spot and also be one of their top shooters. But I still think that he's kind of approaching this team as if I think Ty-Laur Johnson's going to be here. I don't think there's necessarily, from what I can hear and what I've heard, I don't necessarily know at this point if they have a firm decision one way or another. Like if they know or they don't know that he's coming, I still think it's up in the air. And so with that, I think Kenny's operating as if he's going to be here and that point guard competition is still going to happen when he does arrive between him and Karan Davis. So, it's not the end of the world that he's not here, but we'll see because the clock is ticking. We have a hard deadline approaching in less than a month.
If that deadline comes and goes, are there options out there for Louisville? Is there anybody out there that you're looking at?
There could be. The portal right now is really bare. Javon Quinterly from Alabama was a name that kind of got that mentioned with Louisville, but he signed with Memphis and Penny Hardaway yesterday, which makes Memphis a legitimate player nationally. They're going to have such a fun team to watch. But there's also guys out there that are still available, like a Jose Perez from West Virginia. There's some other names that are kind of less sexy. Trey Woodbury, who played at Utah Valley, has some questions about eligibility. These are guys that could play at that D1, Power 5 level. But I don't think that any of those are fits for Louisville at this point. I don't think that they would take anyone. I would watch for a potential reclassification. Like I would watch for a player maybe in the class of 2024 who enrolls in January and joins the team on that last scholarship, if that happens, right? I'm not saying we're at that point yet, but that's what I would watch for. There is going to be some more portal action, I think, over the next couple of weeks. But for the most part, I think it's going to be Louisville probably would not add somebody who will play minutes this year. So, again, you're right back in that spot last year. And it really brings up the question, well, what did Kenny learn from last year, right? And that's, if you're cool with that, I want to talk about this podcast interview because I thought it was really fascinating, not only because of the discourse that it created online between fans of, oh, it's great to hear from Kenny, to he said everything wrong, to, why are we hanging on every word? There's so many different opinions on this. But what I ultimately walk away is kind of the big thing for me that I am most frustrated about with Kenny Payne is that he's what Louisville fans, what I want to hear, and maybe Presley, this is a completely wrong interpretation of fans. I never try to be one that pretends that I have like a voice of all the fans. But what I want to hear from him is, damn it, we just want to win. I have not heard him say that one time. That whole interview is about learning in adversity, being prepared, becoming young, adults and fine men, and all that is great. Like you got to have a little bit of that and also a little bit of that edge to want to win. but I'm just simply not hearing from Kenny. And maybe it's just that's not how he speaks. That's not in his vernacular. That's not kind of his approach. Winning is a byproduct of doing these other things. But my God, man, I listened for 25 minutes, and we're going to talk about what he said about what he learned from last year, because that's the kind of stuff that fans really have the right to kind of say, hey, what the heck? But I just want to hear him say more than anything, we want to go out this year and we want to win. We want to win basketball games. We want to make the NCAA tournament. We want to prove that last year was a fluke. But instead, what you got was this hodgepodge answer of blaming the NCAA and the death penalty and these unfortunate cards that were dealt to him. And all of that is true to some extent, but it did not, in my opinion, limit them last year from winning more than 4 games. No chance, right? That's where I'm at on that. So Kenny, just tell us you want to win, man. Just remind us one time for the one time that you want to win. Like, that's just what I want to hear.
Name some teams that are here locally. Spalding, Bellarmine, obviously Scott Davenport could be a high level D1 coach if he wanted to be. Let's just say Spalding's basketball coach took over at U of L. Do you think that Louisville could go to a 5-win season last year with Spalding's head coach?
Probably not. Spalding doesn't get 5 wins. They don't get 5 wins themselves, man, with the coach they have now, let alone he jumps up 5 levels in ultimate. No, I don't think so. I get where you're coming from with that, but no, like that's that's silly.
But
Scotty,
I think
Scotty could win 20 games with this.
Yeah, exactly. You give Scotty Davenport that roster. I think they win 12, 15 games. I don't think they have a problem with that. Now, the coaching style would be completely different. Could you imagine L. Ellis playing on a Scott Davenport team?
I can't.
I
can't really picture any of them playing on a Scott Davenport team. But it would be, think about that at its max, though, right? You got L out there passing the ball, setting it up like, I cannot remember CJ. It's going to kill me that I cannot remember his last name. He was their point guard for the first couple of years. Anyways,
Fleming.
Yes, CJ Fleming. Yes, that's his name. That's correct.
Okay,
yeah.
There you go.
So you had guys like him who are just out there orchestrating, and they're balling. And then you got these lanky 4s that are cutting and they're getting dunks and they're shooting 3s. Like, I literally can't even imagine plug and playing anyone from last year's roster into that. But it would be fun if they were trained to play under that. That'd be a hell of a time to watch that.
I guess the point that I'm getting at is that everybody had a play in last season. The players had a play in having a 4-win season. That's why you get rid of most of them. The administration had a play in this. Probably most of all, the coaching staff had a play in this. They had a hand in making the roster what it was, and it's their job to make sure that it's never what it was. It's not supposed to be what it was last year, right? It's their job to try to solve and figure out how to squeeze the most out of the roster that you have. And that just didn't happen. I understand maybe kind of just starting from square one, but you get halfway through the season and Kenny's like, no, this isn't the worst you're going to see. It's going to get worse. What are people supposed to take away from that? Like, I understand that you kind of have to peel things away and break things before they start to heal correctly, right? But at the same time, like, that's not what people want to hear. And by the same token, Jacob, you were talking about you want to hear Kenny Payne talk about winning. It reminds me of a coach that we know all too well down the road. He has to go out of his way during a press conference to say, I want to win. I want to win. I think every coach wants to win, but it'd be nice to hear things that reflect that. Because Kenny Payne is obviously hired to make sure that he guides the team in a way that would lead them to success and lead the players to success. But he's also hired to win games, and he's going to lose his job if he doesn't win games. So I think that's an important thing to at least recognize. And you're right. A lot of his answers to questions don't seem to be indicative of such. They seem to be indicative of a guy who is, all he wants to talk about is the same stuff that a John Calipari wants to talk about, right? It's that, we want to get guys to the league. We want to see players develop into great young men. Those are great things to say when you're 10-2 or 20-6 or something like that. But those are not answers that you should be comfortable giving on the heels of a 4-win season when you lost to Bellarmine and Lipscomb and App State and you're losing by 40 to Arkansas, and you only lose by 35 because they call off the dogs, or like you get housed by Cincinnati, or you get you get just drilled by all of these teams in your conference. I mean, Louisville we should be talking about this team being double bye every single year in the ACC tournament.
Yeah,
that should be the expectation. The expectation should be Final Fours, and we're talking about like, no, maybe we'll win 15 games this year. I don't know. Maybe we'll win 20 games. Like, and that's just not going to cut it, man. Like you're like, even with all of the benefit of the doubt that Kenny Payne is getting from fans and from the administration, you do if you have a year even remotely resembling what last year was like, and you're gone this year. Like he's got to, in my opinion, I mean, you got to be at least very damn close to an NCAA tournament. I don't know if I look at this roster and think, all right, well, that's something that's going to happen this year. And that's incredibly disheartening. The last thing I'll say, and then Jacob, I'll let you jump in here, is you look at multiple examples across the country last year of programs that are not as historically great as Louisville, that don't have the advantages or the fan base or the money or the exposure that a Louisville has, right? And yet these coaches come in and they turn teams from absolute shit into a success story. There are a number of those just from last season alone, and from the last 5 or 6 seasons, right? And Kenny Payne comes in and Louisville goes from really bad to inexplicably worse. I think people were trying to get him to answer for that a little bit, and he's pretty much just kind of tap dancing around that. That's kind of what I got from the interview.
You're spot on. And I think, look, at the end of the day, like, because a lot of people have been saying, oh, we want to hear from Kenny. We want to hear more. Why is he not doing local media more? Why is he not talking more? All of those questions, and they're valid to some extent, but like, he doesn't owe anyone anything here in terms of speaking and doing availability. Would it be a benefit? Would it help him? Probably to some extent, but I also think that fans are right now ready to destroy every word that he says until he wins basketball games. Right. And so that part of it is kind of tricky for him. I think he could say things a lot better and do, more to kind of sell, the improvements. And he, don't get me wrong, he did a great job of talking about the recruiting class. And what really stood out is he said something like, we went 4-29 last year and have a top 5 recruiting class walking in. That says a lot about us. And that's true. But at the same time, you have to prove that you can win basketball games and that you can be at the top of the top when it comes to being a blue blood program like they have been. And if you look at Tommy Lloyd at Arizona, I think that's the closest example to Kenny Payne. He turned Arizona around almost overnight, and he did so with, good coaching. Like, yeah, he had some solid recruiting. He landed some really good guys, and he had some pieces left over. But his coaching is what made Arizona such a dynamic team in his first season, and really the player development. And that's the big thing with Kenny that you didn't see last year, was guys getting better. And so, that speaks to overhauling the roster, and he did that. Check, right? He did all of that. And then it speaks to on the off the court, right? He is doing everything right, and he's doing it so well, from connecting and doing events in the West End to the book readings at schools to doing the health drives to having these season ticket holder events that are very intimate, small events where he's speaking openly, and he's probably talking a lot more in depth about these things. But he's also inviting guys back like Peyton Siva and Damian Lee and Taekwon Dean and these big name Louisville players who can really impact and speak life into the team. And I think that all that stuff is great. And all that stuff is adding up to moving the needle for the program getting better. But look, at the end of the day, man, if you don't come out next season and show that you can win basketball games and that Brandon Huntley-Hatfield and JJ Traynor and Mike James can take a big step, and that you can get the most out of a guy like Trenton Flowers and Dennis Evans and Karan Johnson or Karan Davis and these guys like that, like you can make them fit and you can show that last year was really a fluke. And that's what we're all waiting for. And until that happens, no matter what Kenny Payne does, it's not going to be good enough for a lot of people. And it's going to be, for a lot of people who are angry, it's going to be, for the fans that does satisfy, it's going to be like, how does that satisfy you? And that's where we are. And that's unfortunate, but that's where we are. And it's a very decisive time for basketball. But the good news is that there is some basketball coming around the corner that should be a lot of fun and should have a lot of winning. And that's not Louisville Cardinal necessarily, University of Louisville, but it's a lot of guys that a lot of people know. and I would imagine are going to turn out in big numbers to see.
Yep, TBT, man, and we cannot wait to get into it. Honestly, it really couldn't have come in a better year, right? Because this summer seems infinitely longer than usual because you didn't have anything in the way of March Madness in Louisville, right? You didn't have anything in the way of, I mean, you do have like some football offseason talk, but you didn't have anything in the way of baseball. Like there's really been no local sports scene at all in Louisville. So it's going to be nice to see the return of so many players that brought so many great moments and kind of get like the vibe and the energy back to where it is. Now, I will say it could be a terrible thing if the TBT team is awesome and it's great to watch during the offseason, and then all of a sudden you hit basketball season and like you got like 3 different guys with 6 turnovers and you're losing to Chippewa State or something like that. Like that would certainly not be helpful, but it will be fascinating to watch. I know we've gotten to it quite a bit, but we want to make this kind of the dedicated TBT preview podcast. And who better to talk to than Andrew Zoldan of Inside TBT Podcasts, a guy who probably is more informed than anyone out there,
literally,
in regards to what TBT teams look like.
Yeah,
I think that's crucial because a lot of fans don't know how TBT works. They have the Elam Ending, which I'm not sure every fan is familiar with. They have a lot of players that you may not have remembered from college that went over and had great overseas careers, or they were like, an 8th or 9th man in the NBA for a while. And now they're kind of, this is like their last ditch effort of getting back into the league. There's a lot of players that you might not remember as a casual or even a passionate fan of college basketball that are really successful in the TBT tournament and that are really talented. It's not going to be a cakewalk for Louisville starting with their very first game. That's why we are bringing on Andrew, the expert on TBT. Jacob, any thoughts before we get into things with Andrew about this team as a whole, what you're excited to see, what you're nervous about, what you got?
Yeah. I am so excited for this. This is, kind of like a culmination of several years because I've been watching TBT probably back since 2018. For those of you who are Louisville natives, the name Remy Abel may ring a bell to you. I went to high school with him and have followed him really closely as he went to Indiana and then ultimately to Xavier, played for Chris Mack, and he played for Sideline Cancer, which has been one of the best teams in TBT historically over the last couple of years. He actually played with Trey Lewis on that team last year, which was really cool to watch. But I've been watching the tournament for a while. There's been a number of guys from Louisville who have participated. Jerry Smith is a vet, early on vet, back in 2015, 16 he played. Preston Knowles is another guy who's spent a lot of time in TBT. We obviously, during the bubble, got really into it with Ryan McMahon playing for the Red Scare when he was putting on a show, right? And they're like, whose brother got in the door and got a jersey from their team, that kind of deal. And so it's been building. The excitement has been building here. I don't know what happened last year, whatever. We're past it. We got a team, and this is a legitimate team that day one, they are going to step onto the court, and they ultimately could win it all. They are probably the deepest team, probably the most talented team, top to bottom. There's a lot of really good teams. I mean, they're going to play some teams in the building that are built with NBA players and former NBA players, 5-star recruits, and guys like Archie Goodwin, those big name players that you might recognize. But this team, they have the talent because of a couple of things. But the big thing is Russ Smith. He is going to be the engine that makes this team go. He's going to be one of the leading scorers in the entire tournament. I wouldn't be surprised if he is the leading scorer. But between him and Payton, they're going to play a lot of pick and roll. They're going to play a high-paced game. They're going to have shooters in Kyle Couric and Chris Dow and Nick Mayo. They have a lot of versatility. They got, Dylan Avar. They've got Rakeem Buckles. They've got just a culmination of talent. They are dripping in everything that you need, from length for rebounding to shooting to being able to handle the ball. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But the big concern for me is the big man situation, because it's really Chinanu Onuaku is the only true big man. And one thing you identify, this is a really good, insightful finding from that I've going through your notes for the show, was this year is really the year of the traditional big man in TBT. I mean, you're going to see guys here in Louisville like Johnny O'Brien, who played at LSU, played in the NBA for several years. A guy like Jace Johnson that played for Marquette in Utah, was the leading rebounder in the G League last year. He's a 7-footer who can move. Like, those guys are going to be very impactful. And if for any reason Chinano Onuaku gets in foul trouble, yeah, you got Shane Bohannon, and yeah, you got Nick Mayo who will stretch the floor, and you could probably put a guy like Earl Clark at the 5. You can get away with some lineups that you have, but you really don't have many traditional big men, and that's a little bit concerning in a tournament where it's a single elimination. So every single game you could go home, and it's all about the right matchups. And if Louisville draws a matchup like at Everland Drive in the second round, where they could have to face a Johnny O'Brien and Jace Johnson, that could be a real problem for them.
Yep, I honestly think that Louisville fans are going to get acclimated and kind of adopt a couple of guys on this team that were not Louisville Cardinals in college. So that'll be interesting. Nick Mayo is the name that I'm on big time. I think Nick is actually going to be a starter for this team.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with my buddy about that you thought that. And by the end of it, we both were like, you know what? I think you might be right.
Yeah.
At first, I'm like, listen to this dumb opinion my friend had.
And here's my reasoning. So if you think back to the 2013 national championship team, the two big men were Gorgie Zhang and Stephen Van Treach, right? And both of those guys were known as mobile kind of pick and pop type of players, guys who could run the floor. And Chinano Onuaku is a lot of things, but he's not incredibly mobile. He's much more of a back-to-the-back traditional big man. Now he does have a mid-range game, and as you become a pro, especially in the modern age, you have to develop a big mid-range game to be successful. And I know Chinano Onuaku played in 6 NBA games, and he was 100% from the free throw line, shooting underhanded. Nobody can ever take that away from him. However, I think that Nick Mayo is a better fit around a nucleus of a Russ Smith, of a Peyton Siva, of a Chris Dow, of a Kyle Keurig, of a Shane Bohannon, all these guys that can kind of spread you out a little bit. I think that Nick Mayo, if you're not familiar with him, fans are going to love to get familiarized with him. He's a guy who all throughout his career has shot at least 35-40% from 3, but he can muck it up with the best of them. He's a great slasher and cutter in the paint as a big man. He's a guy who can distribute. So it'll be
here's the fun fact for you. You ready for this?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Did you know that he is the all-time leading scorer in Eastern Kentucky basketball history?
I did know that
in the OVC.
Yes.
I mean, look, and you pointed this out the other day when we were talking about this. He was Everland's Drive's best player last year on the team that I think they finished in the final 5, or maybe they even finished. I really can't remember what the standings shook out, but they kind of had a team built not necessarily around him, but he was a starter, core piece. And he's not even Louisville's, he could start, but he's not one of Louisville's big names. And he came over here to join this team. That shows you that not only did they didn't just go out and pick guys because they played for Louisville. Oh, we wanted to grab this guy. We want to get this guy just because it's a big name. They built out a team that I think that they believe they can win with. And he is a guy that you may not know about, but he could end ultimately being one of the second 2, 3, 4 top players on this team. And if you don't mind, let me throw another name out there. Chris Dow. Another Louisville native. I don't mean to have bias here. If you know me personally, you know that I don't necessarily brag about how much I enjoyed high school in terms of the quality of experience at Eastern High School, but I did get to watch a lot of really damn good basketball in high school. I think ultimately 13 or 14 guys went Division I during my 4 years at Eastern. And so to see Chris Dow, who played at Bellarmine, national champion, we had him on the podcast right before we launched the State of Louisville Life in Basketball, and he told his story about climbing the ranks overseas. I mean, this is a guy who was playing in a C League in France and is now playing in the top league in Israel for one of the most prestigious teams overseas. So that really kind of shows you what this team is getting. And we haven't even mentioned Wayne Blackshear. We haven't even mentioned really Shane Bohannon. We haven't really mentioned the addition of Earl Clark, who this week, that's one of the most massive names in terms of not only fan popularity, but played in the NBA, won a championship, played alongside of Kobe Bryant.
Earl Sanity, baby.
That's right. He's back on campus. That's a huge deal to have him on this team. And it's just going to be so fun to have our childhoods, all of these players we grew up watching, and then ultimately being around in college, like Russ and Peyton, all on the floor at the same time. that Stephen Rummage said Louisville football right now is better than sex. That might be better than sex. That lineup, seeing these guys on the floor who took Louisville to win championships and Final Fours and made them this program that they are, they're going to all be together on the same basketball court playing in the same game. That's pretty cool sex.
Yep. I will say, if you guys keep saying dumb shit like that, I'm going to have some talks with your wives. But outside of that, I mean, you're right though.
Honestly, it's metaphorical, man. It's just a metaphor. Okay.
I was about to say, every time my mom makes
feeling, that's what it's all about.
Every time my mom makes better than sex cake, she doesn't call it better than sex cake. She calls it like better than fun cake, like something stupid like that.
What is, I've never heard of.
You've never had better than sex cake? Oh,
I've never heard of it, man. What is that?
Yeah, well, I'll just sit there and be pouty for a second and then ask for a second piece. And I'm like, it's very good, but it's better than sex? Really? Really? Who named this? Really?
I don't know, man. I'm having a weird feeling about this conversation and where it's going, but I've never heard of that cake. That's an interesting cake.
Anyways, just to get into some stuff, and then we'll get into we'll bring Andrew on and kind of get into the nitty gritty of TBT.
We'll ask him if he thinks TBT is better than sex. We'll see what his thoughts are on that.
Yeah, honestly, that should be the title. TBT ... better than sex ? Exclamation point ? But no, like I'm interested. You're right. You've been talking about Eberlin Drive a lot. I'm interested in their core guard group, because you have some very interesting Kentucky related names. AJ Slaughter from WKU, Archie Goodwin, who is a success story at Kentucky. And then their first guy off the bench probably is going to be DJ Cooper, who is extremely successful at Ohio. Then down low, they got Jace Johnson. That is a solid squad as it is, and they have some pretty quality depth and some Kentucky roots as well. So don't be surprised if you see some people there with blue on, pulling on good old Archie Goodwin.
And I also, you can't overlook War Ready, the first round matchup. This is another team that's built with guys. Auburn necessarily, they've been really successful more recently, but historically haven't always been a top program. But they're going to have guys that you'll recognize, like a Deshaun Murray, a Danielle Purifoy, Horace Spencer, Zeb Jasper, who actually I think played this past year, and then TJ Dunnins. But overall, besides that, Malik Dunbar, another name, they don't necessarily have some of the big names that Louisville has. I think this game potentially, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I think Louisville could ultimately run them out of the gym. I think it's going to take them a little bit to get used playing each other, where this team is a team that's participated together for a few years. But I think Louisville's got the chance to blow them out if they can get their legs underneath them and really get a feel for each other, because this team is they don't necessarily have that one or two guys that can stir the drink, score with a Russ Smith. And when you're talking about going against Louisville, like, you ultimately, at the end of the day, like, you've got to be able to limit Russ Smith, or else no matter what, even if Payton's having a bad day, even if Shinano can't get a bucket inside, Russ Smith could go for 47 at any given point in this tournament. And he very well could. He very well could. But my prediction is Louisville's not going to win TBT this year. I think that they're going to get out of the regional, but this is a tournament that takes teams typically a couple of years to kind of get down and figure it out. And luckily, this team is relatively young outside of like an Earl Clark and Rakeem Buckles. This team is young, so I think that you could see them come back for runs a couple of years in a row. But I do think they'll make some noise and be a lot of damn fun in the process, man. Yeah,
and it kind of stinks to – that's the great thing about TBT, right? Like, that if they don't win, it'll leave this like kind of weird taste in everybody's mouths. But at the same time, then like if they're one and done, I think that you might never see this Louisville team again. Like, I think that they might just be like, because Peyton Stevens at the end of his career, Shane Bohannon is, he's a guy who hasn't even been playing basketball for a while. Same with Peyton and Russ. They're out, living their lives and doing, dipping their toes into other entrepreneurial fields and stuff like that. You got Earl Clark is obviously at the very end of his career as well. So a lot of these bigger name guys, this might be the last time that you get a chance to see them. And if they do reconvene next season, it's going to look a lot different than what you see this year. So we'll talk to Andrew a little bit on the other side about what we're going to be seeing in TBT. And without further ado, let's go ahead and bring him on. right, we're back with our guest for this week, Andrew Zoldan of the official TBT podcast, Inside TBT. Andrew, how are we doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. I am basically a few hours away from getting on the road to Wichita, getting ready to jump into all things TBT. So I'm doing fantastic. Always excited to talk TBT. How are you guys doing? TBT coming to Louisville. That's got to be exciting.
It's been something we've been waiting for a while, I think. I think there was a bit of a tease in 2021, I believe, where a lot of people were not even led to believe. I think it was just kind of a thought process that Louisville was going to be involved in the tournament, and there was some feedback there. They weren't ready to take the team until Louisville fully had the roster that TBT was looking for. So, yeah, definitely, especially after last season, the way that things went for the actual college basketball season for Louisville fans, I think people are just itching to
need this.
Yeah.
Gotta have it.
Fans need something positive.
Yeah. And Andrew, I'll say one thing that's really interesting about this market in particular is I think TBT was kind of a foreign concept leading up into 2020 with the bubble when Ryan McMahon played for the Red Scare and really had a couple of big games. But prior to that, some of the like big basketball fans, it's a very smart fan base who really watches a myriad of basketball. But they got to watch guys like Jerry Smith play in some of the early days of TBT. Preston Knowles played. I think Edgar Soso is another guy. And we've had guys along the way the last couple of years here locally who have played that maybe weren't Louisville guys. But it's been building and building and building. And you talk about this past year, putting that banner up for the 2013 national championship team, these guys coming back together. It really kind of kicked all of this off. And I'm interested to see, like, how many new regions have you gone into in the last couple of years, like kind of anticipating what the crowd might be like or what the fans might be like? Because I would say that this team, like, and what it's going to be like out at Freedom Hall here in a couple of weeks is it's going to be a madhouse, man. Like, it is going to be a true college basketball, like, fan experience.
I agree with that 100%. And what's really cool is we have Wichita as like our established venue and location where everyone there knows about TBT. Everyone there's getting their tickets as if it's an extension of the college basketball season. Because now I think this is either the third or fourth year in a row, maybe third year in a row that we're going to Wichita. So they're ahead of the pack in terms of like ticket sales and what we're expecting attendance wise. But Lubbock and Louisville are kind of neck and neck right now, in that second place range. And we're so excited about Lubbock and Louisville because we know that the fans are going to be crazy. And when we talk about Freedom Hall, I mean, that's a big venue that we're going into in Freedom Hall. And we're expecting it's going to be pretty packed. And, Russ and Siva and those guys have done a great job of generating the hype in addition to what, we've been able to do at TBT. But it is like we definitely see how excited the Louisville fans are and how excited the city and the state are to not just have TBT in town, but also the team that's been put together. You mentioned like 2021, there was some rumblings or guys have played on other teams. Like this Louisville roster for the Ville is like what most TBT teams have in their fifth year.
Yeah.
Doing TBT, not actually fifth, but their third year. It takes a few years. Guys have to see it on TV and then they're like, oh, I guess that is something I would be a part of. Or, hey, Russ Smith played in this last year. He had a great time. Now he's calling Peyton Siva, trying to convince him to play. But like everyone is on board for this team. Like I don't know if there's anyone that you guys were like, ooh, I wish we had this guy. But I feel like everyone on Louisville fans' wish lists have hit for this, with the exception of Luke Hancock, who doesn't play basketball professionally anymore. So I understand the need or the want to have him on the team, but that's more of a nostalgic thing than it is like this is the roster that can compete for a TBT championship, which, I definitely think the Ville is going to be competing for a TBT championship here in their first year, which is rare and very cool.
Yeah. We go ahead, Press.
Well, I was just going to say it seemed like, I think that TBT and the group of guys that were trying to get things off the ground a couple of years ago, I think that it was probably at the time, I think fans were, I wouldn't say upset, but fans were like, well, what the heck? Like, we kind of felt like the momentum was there to get it going. And the last few years, to be quite honest with you, as a Louisville fan, have been very, very, I would say difficult. You never say difficult as a fan, right? But it's been, it's
Frustrating.
Yeah.
Frustrating. Yeah. So fans are looking for any reason to get on board, especially because if you're a college sports fan, outside of college baseball, there's nothing during the dog days of summer. So for a town that's super hungry for basketball, it's going to be fun to see. And if you get online and look at the ticket prices, like it's very similar to that of a game in the KFC Yum Center in Louisville for a regular season basketball game. So that's been interesting to watch as well. Like I thought that there would be kind of enough to go around, and it seems like there's definitely a desire and a hunger from the fan base. Then you have the other angle where you have a group of guys that were on that national championship team in 2013, and everything that's come since then, all the drama and the chaos and the nonsense. A lot of these players weren't even allowed back on campus for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. I think there's even some controversy with Montrezl Harrell. I know Shane Bohannon wasn't allowed to be acknowledged with the 2013 team last season. So there's all kinds of stuff that went on behind the scenes where these guys are finally getting their chance to kind of right the ship. They've had to live under this cloud for the last 5 or 6 years. So there's also that aspect that plays into it as well. I'm not sure how much people think Kansas went through similar stuff. And I'm not sure we think at all about Kansas having any sort of vindication or anything like that for any NCAA punishment or anything like that. But they also won a national championship like 2 or 3 years ago as well. So there's that aspect as well. Louisville won a national championship. They were okay after that season while Pitino was still here. And then it's been very rocky since then. Since Pitino left and the scandal and everything, there's been nothing to really cling to. So been fascinating from that aspect. I guess my question for you, Andrew, if you could just look at this more from a broad scope, if you're a fan that doesn't know much about TBT, I think many people are aware of what the Elam Ending is, but a lot of people aren't aware of exactly how this is formed. So can you give just kind of a broad scope background of how TBT was formed and what makes it unique from other levels of basketball?
Yeah, well, it was formed, 9 tournaments ago, and after this one will be 10 tournaments ago because this is the 10th anniversary. I've been involved doing the podcast since the bubble year. The Elam Ending, I want to say that was added in 2017 or 2018, which was a huge addition. And for 5 years, TBT was the only league doing it. Now it's kind of been adapted in other ways, and other areas like the G League and Summer League have it for overtime, but that's kind of a different version because the score is always tied in that instance. The beauty of the Elam Ending, which fans will get to see in Louisville in person for the first time, is like a team trailing by 5 comes back to win very frequently. A team trailing by 3 comes back to win very frequently. Like the whole point of the Elam Ending, and I don't mean to speak for Nick Elam, but one of the points of the Elam Ending was that the team losing at the end of the game has a chance to come back because you can't just foul and give the guys free throws. So other leagues are doing it, but the TBT is the true version of it, which is with 4 minutes left in the game, the clock comes off. You add 8 points to the team's winning score. The best example that I like to give is, it's 72-70, and then all of a sudden it's first team to 80. I mean, when you think about who you got on the Ville in this game, all right, in TBT, you got Russ Smith, Peyton Siva, Kyle Kuric. Those guys are going to absolutely kill it in the Elam Ending. Kuric will hit 2 threes, Siva will get a layup. The game will be over. Russ Smith, I would put money on Russ Smith having a game in TBT where he scores all 8 Elam Ending points. That will probably happen, and that will be absolutely insane. And every TBT social media will be saying, holy shit, Russ Smith just had all 8 points in the Elam Ending, or Peyton Siva just had 4 straight unbelievable assists to Nanu or to Earl Clark. I mean, how crazy are all these names that I'm saying? If you're
it really is. Look, I'm going to just real quickly just say this, and I'm not going to ask you this. I told Presley I would, but I want to keep it PG for this part of the episode. But we had a local radio commentary, a local radio host mentioned that Louisville football, this is kind of unrelated, but it gets to a point. Louisville football has been on such a run and just doing so many good things that Louisville football right now is better than sex. And what I said in the previous part of the episode was that getting guys like Russ Smith and Peyton Siva and Kyle Kurrick and Earl Clark and Shinano Onawaku, all of these guys coming together and playing on the same team across all these eras, for Louisville basketball fans, like right now, that is the sex that they need. Like totally is, because these players cross a number of generations and they are all fan favorites. I mean, it's just crazy how they can flip a roster like this in a matter of no time.
I agree with you. I agree with the verbiage that you're using. I agree with the examples that you're using, but I also think that Louisville football right now is probably a bigger brand than Louisville basketball, because just Lamar Jackson alone is part of the reason for that. But I kind of think there could be some pressure on the Louisville basketball program when they see the output and reaction from, the games at Freedom Hall from TBT. I mean, there's going to be guys being like, hey, this is what it used to be like. We can get it back to this. We can do this. We can, I saw that the guy in Louisville had like 12 points, didn't miss against Kentucky. The guy who's on the BAL team. I'm up to date. I'm up to date.
Yeah, I like this, man. This is great.
Don't you think it's a little bit like disappointing though, that like that's what Louisville basketball fans are so excited about though right now?
Exactly.
An off-season tournament in Africa, guy on the team played well against Kentucky. Like the fan base is kind of grasping at straws right now.
It's dark days, man. Yeah. Kentucky fans were excited about a practice, or they were defending their team because a practice player was going to work on one of their current stars. It's dark days here in the state of Kentucky. Is. So
they're going to turn it around. This is going to be the start.
I feel that.
You need something like this. They're going to be scrimmaging together, the week leading up. And Peyton Siva is a big advocate. He's going to be like, hey, guys, watch us this weekend. This is what, Louisville basketball really can be.
Yep. I wholeheartedly agree. And Andrew, to kind of bring you up to date as well, I know you discuss a lot of teams and the way that a lot of this plays out across the country. And I think should be noted as well that this team is practicing with current Louisville players every day. They're coming to have speaking engagements with the current Louisville team around as well. So is that something that's common, like say like a Wichita State or a Texas Tech that you mentioned, West Virginia, something like that? Are fans getting behind this team? And is there kind of almost an example being set, or a culture, a standard that's being held because of TBT teams that are coming back? Or is this something that is kind of more unique to Louisville?
No. So unfortunately, it's not unique to Louisville, but it is a good thing that Louisville is not skipping out on it, because there's some teams that are, skipping out on having a training camp, or they have guys who are just finishing up overseas, so they can't really do the full training camp. But it's kind of become the norm for the alumni teams, and the non-alumni teams do it too. It's just not at, their college campus, but the alumni teams have training camps at their colleges. The Buffalo team, the team that won last year, they've lost one game ever in TBT. They're 10-1, and their one loss, Wes Clark, who's a bucket. I'm sure you guys know him. He was hurt. They have a big training camp in Buffalo. Like that's just become kind of the norm, is having a training camp and then riding it into TBT. So no, Louisville's not unique, but they are doing the right things. These guys I've been seeing clips for months of these guys playing pickup together. And even like Omar Pruitt and Chris Dow, the non-Louisville guys, have been at all the pickup stuff. They've been at all the things. Yeah. I mean, it's so not unique, but they are doing the right things. I've been talking to a lot of GMs. I've been talking to a lot of players. They're like, yeah, training camp starting this week starting that week. I don't know if Ohio State is doing the same thing this year, but Ohio State every year has alumni week where the alumni come in, and the years that they've played in TBT, they've lined that up with, a TBT training camp. So it's one of the things that all college programs have started to do. Like I saw that, Jared Allen was with the Texas guys yesterday, spoke to the team. So like all the teams are doing it. And it's because over the summer players come home. So as long as you got all the guys around, it's going to happen. But I do think that Louisville has done it for longer than these other teams. And part of it, I think, is because Russ and Peyton, I feel like they've been home since like February or April, whatever it is. So they've done a lot more than the average team, I would say. But most teams are locked in by this point. They got a weekend of training camp or so, and then they go, to their regional. Louisville doesn't have to travel, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let me ask you this, right? So just in that same theme of overarching TBT and kind of what makes a team successful, as somebody who's watched the last couple of years, maybe not you, but the blue collar you winning it all last year really was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, I'm very familiar with a guy like CJ Massenberg of watching college basketball. That dude, as you mentioned with Wes Clark, is a bucket. And they were a really good squad, but you wouldn't expect a Buffalo team to come in historically and win a tournament like that with some of the, West Virginia's, the Boeheim's Army, some of these big names that have won throughout the years as alumni teams. So let me ask you, what, in your opinion, right, if you're building a team, what constitutes a good TBT team? Like, what is the recipe that you put together to concoct a championship team?
Yeah, so there's two answers to that. There's the alumni team answer and the non-alumni team answer, but they both kind of relate. So you really do need guys that have experience playing together. So on the non-alumni team side, they usually are not doing it in their first year. Only one non-alumni team has ever won Overseas Elite, and they won it their first year in it in 2015, but they ended up winning 4. So by the time they were winning their second, third, fourth, they had played, 20 games together. They had practiced all that. So they're the exception to the rule, to where like they became a dynasty. They had played together for a while. You have to have played together in some sort. So whether that's the core of your team played together in college, or you guys are always playing pickup together. Buffalo team is a great example. Those guys all played together in college. They upset Arizona, and then the next year they were in the top 25 the whole year. They were a really, really good college team. It's literally the team from college playing together. So they came into it right away and had all the experience. And the other thing that you need is you need role players that can fit in anywhere. When Ohio State won, they had a guy by the name of Jeff Gibbs. Or Carmen's crew. He didn't go to Ohio State, but he was from Columbus. The ultimate role player, just like a stretch four in the sense that he was undersized. So undersized for rebound, move the ball, score, great defender. Like, that's a guy that fits in on any team. So you need guys that played together and have experience playing together. But then if you're adding others that haven't played together, they have to be the ultimate role player. And I don't mean ultimate role player like you don't need to score your points, but like the ultimate fit in any situation. Tyrese Rice and DeAndre Kane and DJ Kennedy, they joined the team when Boeheim's Army won. They'd never played with the Syracuse guys, but they are the ultimate teammates, the ultimate, like Tyrese Rice could probably start in the NBA and fit in on any team. Like he just fits in,
right.
So like Dominique Jones, he's joining the sideline cancer team. He's going to fit in right away. He's the ultimate fit in guy. So if you're going to have guys that haven't played with you before, you need guys that could play with anyone and that make anyone better. It's almost like LeBron in a sense. If you put LeBron on any team, he's giving you guys a chance to win, even if it's the first time these people have ever picked up a basketball, because he just can pick up so quickly on game tendencies and stuff like that. So you need guys like that. And I think Chris Dow and Omar Pruitt are great examples of that based on what I've been reading and what I've been seeing. And like, yeah, they've played in some pickup together, but even if they had never played together, these are guys that fit in wherever they go. Yeah. They fit in where they go overseas. They fit in, as complements to Siva, Russ, Keurig, Blackshear. So like you need the perfect combination of guys who have played together and role players. And Buffalo just showed up with a full team that had played together, and the guys who hadn't played together. They had a guy, Edric Dennis. Okay. Call him Ed. His first year, he played a lot. Last year, he was like the locker room vocal guy. You may have even seen the video. He's like, we're not effing losing to these guys. We're not like, and they were like up 15 at half, and he was screaming at them like that. Like he was the perfect locker room guy for someone that he went to TCU, nowhere near Buffalo, So like you need guys like that, and the teams that find them do well. A great example, last year, the Texas Tech team had a guy by the name of Chandre Jones. This is a great TBT story. They had Chandre Jones. All right. He was arguably the best player on their team last year, averaged 30 a game. Okay. This year, Texas Tech, year 2 of the Air Raiders experience, he's not on the team. They have too many, Texas Tech alumni. They kind of over recruited him and he's not on the team. So what does he do? He goes and he joins the Texas team, all right, Austin's own, and now they could play in the second round. But like that was a coveted TBT free agent where any team he would have been perfect for, a guy that can just score and move the ball. So like the Texas Tech fans on Twitter all the time say to him, we wish you were still on the team. Like, we wish you had you. We wish you had you. So like the glue guys, it's so funny because, and this is a long-winded answer, but like the non-alumni guys so quickly become beloved by the alumni schools. I remember people were literally saying Illinois needs to build Mike Dahm a statue campaign because of how good he was in the TBT bubble. So like you just become beloved by these fan bases, which is it's cool that happens. Like if Chris Dow hits an Elam Ender to send Louisville to the quarterfinals or the Elite Eight, like he will have a statue outside of the, the Yum Center.
Yeah. Here's a fun fact for you. Okay. And I don't have the research to back this up, but I think this is true. My high school here in Louisville, Eastern High School, has the most guys playing in TBT this year. I believe that there are a total of 4 guys from Eastern High School that will be playing in TBT. Remy Abel plays for Zip 'em Up, had been on sideline cancer. Trey Moses was from Ball State, plays overseas. I forget who he's playing with. You have Chris Dow, who obviously is playing for the Louisville team. And then there's one more who I am missing off the top of my head, and it's going to absolutely kill me. But it's really interesting that the high school that I went to has got all these guys playing in the tournament. And it's another step of showing you just like the interest in this city the last couple of years, even for guys who didn't necessarily play at U of L. And it's going to be interesting to see how those, now that Louisville has a team, how fans become much more attached to this team and how maybe some of those guys like a Chris Dow, like a Remy Abel could eventually end up playing for this team. Let me ask you, go ahead.
Funny that you mentioned Remy Abel real quick. I was driving through Chicago today and I saw him wearing a TBT shirt and I rolled down the window and said, "What's up?" I mean, I'm 99% sure it was him.
Yeah. If not the guys like Remy Abel, I don't know. Not me.
But it's funny that you mentioned him today of all people.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So that's the bloodline of basketball here in Kentucky is rich. There's no doubt about that. But let me ask you a little bit about style of play, because obviously in the NBA and in college basketball, we're seeing more and more of the traditional big man kind of phased out of the game and becoming more of this kind of, well-rounded, being able to shoot, pick and pop, being able to handle the ball, being able to do a little bit of everything. And you don't see more of those kind of burly traditional big men thrive. But this year, what I think makes a lot of the roster makeup really interesting is there are a ton of traditional big men playing in this tournament. Chinanu Onuaku for Louisville is a great example. Louisville will face Johnny O'Bryant and Jace Johnson potentially in the second round with Eberlin Drive. So, I mean, that's in this region, it's rich for big men. But I want to ask you, what is it like for the big men in terms of just the overall style of play? Like, can you win with a dominant guy that you feed the post with, or is that more of like a secondary type of deal in this tournament?
Yeah, I mean, big men get overshadowed in TBT, but they're still really good. I'll give you a few names. Nick Perkins, maybe a little less traditional of a big man because he's a little undersized and can step back and shoot, but he's also like just a monster down low. He was on the all-tournament team last year. Like we basically the TBT community was deciding between Wes Clark, CJ Massenberg, and Nick Perkins for MVP, and really none of those guys would have been the wrong answer. It ended up ultimately going to CJ just because he was kind of like the facilitator of everything. But Nick Perkins was an absolute beast last year, and he will be again this year. So that kind of breaks that stereotype right there. Another name, Keith Clanton. He's always went to either UCF or USF, one of the two. He's on the Florida TNT Challenge ALS merge team, which is Challenge ALS Florida. And he literally eats all day long in the paint. Like you just throw him the ball down low and he scores. So like if you have a really, really good big man, you can use it to your advantage. Trevor Thompson on the Red Scare, Dayton alumni, really good pick and roll guy. John Flowers and Kevin Jones on Best Virginia. Those are their 2 best players. Might not be this year because they've added some younger guys, but like Kevin Jones was so good last year. Like if you have a good big man, he can succeed in TBT. But if you're building a team from scratch, you probably want to get the guards first and then kind of figure out the big men later. But if you have a big man at your disposal, you want him and you want to take advantage of it. And Nick Perkins is a great example. Trevor Thompson, like I said, Delroy James on Autism Army, now their program for autism. He's definitely a little smaller as well, but he was really, really good last year. And the reason that these guys are a little smaller is because the big men
are
in the NBA.
Yeah.
Right.
So if Nick Perkins was 3 inches taller, he'd be guarding Jokic, and I think Nick Perkins is good enough to be an NBA player regardless, but like they are a little smaller. Keith Clanton is just immovable, but he's too slow to guard guys in the NBA, but he's immovable. So he might get beat on defense a few times, but he also gets a lot of blocks, like the guards get kind of like the highlights, because in TBT, they're more than likely hitting a crazy step back jumper, Elam Ender, they're getting to the bucket, they're dropping dimes. But I mean, when you check the box scores, there's going to be these big men that have, 20-point games. Nanu's a great example. I think he's going to be great in TBT, but he's going to be as great as Russ and Siva kind of let him be. And I don't necessarily mean them being selfish, but like if Russ starts off the game hot, then they're going to have to double Russ. And then they're going to pick and roll to Shinanu. It's like it starts with the guards. Keith Clanton is the one true example of their offense is throw the ball into Keith Clanton down low and let him turn around and score. But there's some good big men in the tournament. We caught a little bit of heat because we didn't have a ton of big men in the MVP odds, right. But Nick Perkins included was like, y'all don't like MVP or y'all don't like big men, but there's some good big men. Zip them up. Karam Cantor. He's one of the best players in TBT. That's another. I mean, all these guys can shoot now. Every big man can shoot besides, I can't even really think of any big men, even in the NBA, that can't shoot. Like, there's literally none that are coming to my mind. I'm sure I'm blanking on some, but like go down the list of centers. I mean, even the Chicago Bulls, I'm a Bulls fan. Vucevic. Yeah. All right. He's a shooter. He's one of the biggest centers in the league. Like all these guys can shoot now.
Yep. Yeah. I think it's a kind of a necessity. And I think that's ultimately one of the reasons why Chinanu Onuaku didn't have a long NBA career. He has a bit of I'm not sure if people are familiar with this, but he has a bit of a hand. I don't know if you call it a hand defect or something like that, but that's the reason why he shoots free throws underhanded. It's because he has just a weird spin that he puts on the ball that is even more inhibitive of making shots because he's 6'11", 7 feet tall. So one person I did want to bring up, though, we talked about how successful big men are starting to become in this tournament, but adversely, do you think this is still a league where small ball can win? Because you have a team like Louisville that they could have an Earl Clark maybe at the 5, and Nick Mayo could definitely play the 5. I've Jacob and I have been back and forth. He thought I was kind of crazy at first for thinking this, and I think he's kind of come on board with me. I think Nick Mayo is a starter caliber player for Louisville. I think Mayo and Chinanu Onuaku are similar in what they can bring to the table as far as the level of play that they can bring, but they bring two different facets of the game. So you could have a game where you see Mayo play 30 minutes and then the next game he plays 10 minutes. So that'll be fascinating to play off of. But yeah, is there an instance where we could see like a Earl Clark and Rakeem Buckles, mucking it up down low, or Shane Bohannon playing?
Yeah, 6'5" Shane Bohannon. You got him guarding a 7-footer type of deal.
Yeah, I mean these guys are smart. All the coaches in TBT are smart. All the players are smart. It's a long game before the Elam ending. It's a little shorter than NBA and college, but still enough time to adjust and see what's going on and see what's happening. If the other team has a big man that is rebounding well and scoring well, and it's close in the Elam ending, I doubt, there's going to be a massive change to get all the scorers and shooters out there for the Ville, because, that big man would still be able to turn around, face up, and dominate even against a small lineup. And when you only need, 4 buckets, and really only need 3 if you hit 3 or 2 threes in a layup, like you can't really afford to like have a crazy mismatch disadvantage. So I do think there will be small ball lineups and there will be things that will be effective, and I know you didn't really ask this specific of it, but I doubt that there will be a scenario where they try to get the advantage with a smaller lineup, like putting Keurig at the 5 or something crazy like that. But I do think there will be teams, the Ville included, that have smaller lineups, have a lot of shooting, and it has potential to push them out to big leads. But I mean, there's just good big men all over this tournament. The guards, Marcus Keene is a perfect example of that. He could have 15 points and a big man could have 25, and his 15 is probably going to be flashier. It's probably going to be cooler. That's just the nature of how it looks and what happens. I can't see there being a situation where Chinanu's out there and it's hurting the Ville, or Buckles is out there and it's hurting the Ville. I could see a scenario where the other team goes small and then they say, okay, we can't have Buckles and Nanu both out here. But I can't see a scenario where like they're doing something against a regular lineup that's a cause for concern. But I do think this team and these potential lineups are crazy, because you really could throw at, like, I have no clue who's going to start for the Ville, because you want Russ and Siva out there, but I've been hearing that Chris Dow is one of the best guys on the team. Like, he's still active overseas, coming off an unbelievable season overseas. So like, I mean, I don't know how you're not going to not start Russ and Siva back in Freedom Hall, obviously the first game, but like, I don't know what the starting lineup is going to be. I don't know what the closing lineup is going to be. Hopefully they're going to figure that out over the next, 10 days or whatever it is, 6-7 days during camp and stuff. But, I've been hearing about this backup big man on the real Louisville team. So maybe he'll show the Ville some trouble in training camp, and they'll have to rethink their lineups.
Dude, I love that you pointed that out, because it's just so indicative of the state of the Louisville fan base. I love it so much. Like, you already have a good pulse on this fan base, which is great. But speaking of that, I was going to say you have probably a better pulse on TBT as a whole than almost anybody out there. And so you probably have a good understanding of the perception of the top level teams in this tournament. How is Louisville perceived? Are they perceived as one of the favorites? I know, some of the odds kind of lend toward them being a top quarter tier team, right? Would you say that people see them in general as, one of the top 5 or 10 teams in this tournament?
So unfortunately, the way the tournament is set up is a little different from March Madness, in the sense that the 1 seed is playing the 8 seed, which means in the second round, the 1 seed is already now playing a team that is ranked as, a 4 or 5 seed. In the Ville's case, they're the 2 seed. So that means in the second round, they're potentially playing, a 3 seed right away in the second round of the tournament. So they could lose to a 3 seed in the tournament, and it's not that ridiculous for them to lose to a 3 seed in the second round. I think both of the teams that they might potentially play, Eberline Drive or the Jackson Underdogs. The Jackson Underdogs have some really good guards. So like, I think that's a potential crazy matchup. DeSante Bradford and Jalen Barford, like, that would be a crazy second round matchup to match up with Russ and Siva. So while I do think they're one of the favorites, there's not really, besides the first round, a time where they would lose where it would be like shocking. And that's just because instead of playing, the 7 seed or the 9 seed in the second round as a 2 seed, you're playing, or that the 7 seed or the 10 seed, you're playing the 3 seed right away in the second round. And yes, there's the same amount of teams. So, if it was a bigger regional, but it would be set up differently. Even their first round matchup against War Ready, like the Auburn alumni, they're not a 16 seed, they're a 7 seed. They're a 7 seed. So yes, they're one of the favorites, but also you look and you see like, oh shit, the second round matchup right away is a team that you would see in the Elite 8 in March Madness. So that's the only thing that would scare me a little bit in terms of, picking them in a bracket or picking them to win it all, is the fact that these second round matchups are going to be crazy. I mean, you look all across TBT in the second round, it might be, the Xavier alumni against the money team, Floyd Mayweather's team, which is a team that's, in the Elite Eight or so, or the Final Eight, semifinals, quarterfinals every year. Like these are tough second round matchups for all of these 1 seeds and all of these host seeds. So it really, like, it sounds funny, but just these teams like the Xavier alumni, Louisville alumni, Kansas alumni, even a team like the Money team, like all these guys could win TBT or they could lose in the second round, and no one's going to sit there and say it's a massive upset.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though. I think here in Louisville, without some of the context, that the fact like an Everland Drive is one of the most tenured teams in TBT history. They've been to the finals, I think 2 or 3 times. They've finished in the Final Four several other times, and they've got a roster with guys like Archie Goodwin and Johnny O'Brien and Emmett Williams and even Auburn. I mean, we went through the roster when we recorded the first part of the show, and it's not horrible. You got guys like Deshaun Murray and Danielle Purifoy and some well-known Auburn names. Like, of course, it's not a Bruce Brown and some of the other big names that they've had over the last couple of years, but it's still a really solid team who has played in the tournament before. And you just never know. And when it comes down to, Preston and I had this conversation, are you taking Louisville or the field? In my opinion, I'm taking the field just because I think there's still a number of things Louisville hasn't. They need experience, right? This is a damn good team. Russ Smith could be the leading scorer in the tournament when it's all said and done if Louisville gets the chance to go that far, but they don't have the experience in a lot of ways.
He could be the leading scorer and they could lose in 2 games and he could average 36 over the 2 games and they lose. I mean, that would be crazy if that happened. But like there's a scenario where he's all world, like TBT record breaking, and it's just not enough in the second round against Barford and Bradford, or it's not enough in the quarterfinal game if the Air Raiders come over from Lubbock. Any team that they play at any point besides the first round is going to be coming off a run and is going to be thinking they could beat anyone because there's no 16 seed or anything like that. All these teams, I mean, the 7 seeds, the 8 seeds, the 6 seeds, even the 5 seeds, they all feel underseeded. Every team thinks they should be seated higher. And I haven't even mentioned the Gutter Cats who, made it to the quarterfinals last year. That's a team that the Ville would potentially play in the third round. Like every step of the way, there's a hard matchup, which makes this tournament so great. Like I'm looking at my bracket and there's a world where it's Xavier, Louisville, Kansas, and West Virginia alumni teams in the Final Four. And there's also a world where the Final Four is, the Buffalo or the semifinals is just the Buffalo alumni who just run through TBT again, the Aftershocks who run through TBT again, or Team Heartfire, who's a non-alumni team, the Money team, Air Raiders, or like Bleed Green, the North Texas alumni, and the Gutter Cats. Like there's a world where the quarterfinals is all alumni teams. There's a world where all the alumni teams lose early. Like it's so hard to predict. The Elam ending makes it harder to predict, but it more makes the end of games kind of harder to predict. Like if a team's up 15 going to the Elam ending, they're the better team. Like they're 9.9 out of 10 times going to win that game. I think, I know you didn't ask me this directly, but Blue Collar U, Buffalo, they are for sure the favorite. They're the overall number 1 seed if TBT had that. Them losing at any point before the quarterfinals would be, that in my opinion, would actually be shocking. The Ville losing in the second round would stink for Louisville fans, but it wouldn't be shocking. Blue Collar U losing, before the third round, before the quarterfinals would be shocking considering they've lost 1 game ever. And last year they just bulldozed their way to a TBT championship. Outside of them losing in the first or second round, there's nothing in this tournament that would shock me.
I like the way that you put that too, because I think it resonates a bit with fans, the way that TBT is almost kind of captured the essence of the NCAA tournament in a sense. I mean, you have the bracket, you have the win and go home. Like there's, you're off for 5 minutes of a game and that could cost you the tournament, and I think that's kind of what they've captured here is that kind of magic of the NCAA tournament. Now you don't have the full season build up and there's, but I think a lot of that's canceled out by the Elam ending. Because as you suggested, you can't coast into a victory like a 16 versus a 1 may do. A 16 seed is down by 30 and they put in their, walk-on seniors and everybody's asleep for the last 10 minutes of the game. Like that's not going to happen here. Like you got to finish the game strong no matter what. So I like that you're taking kind of old characteristics that have been tried and true and really successful and drawn a lot of eyes. And there's definitely like a mixture of new excitement, which I think is a fascinating way to go about this. If you're a Louisville fan, and we'll make this our last question here. If you're a Louisville fan and you're looking at the first three potential opponents, so that's for fans who aren't familiar, the first three games, if Louisville continues to win, they'll play in Louisville. If you're a fan and you're looking at this roster, is it the Gutter Cats that fans should be the most aware of? What's the team that you would say is the most likely to knock them out?
I would be very afraid of the Jackson, Tennessee underdogs for multiple reasons. One, if they win their first round game, then it's proof that they are underseeded as a 6 seed. And if they win their first round game, it's going to be because DeSanta Bradford and Jalen Barford, were insane in the opening round matchup. And they have the ability to do that the whole entire tournament. The Gutter Cats, if they get to that point, would be a team to watch out for. But I would not overlook, I wouldn't overlook War Ready, but I really wouldn't overlook the winner of Eberline Drive and the underdogs. I mean, the best player on Eberline Drive, in my opinion, is AJ Slaughter. And he's a guy that
Louisville native. Let's go, man.
He actually almost played on the Louisville team. Like he was deciding between staying with Eberline Drive and playing on the Louisville team. And then when he found out he could play for Eberline Drive, who he's played with forever, and get to play in Louisville in front of his, family and friends, he ultimately decided to stay with Eberline Drive. But he is a really good guard. So like if you have to play him in the second round, now all of a sudden, like Siva's got his match, and your match in Siva. So I would say that the winner of that second round matchup is going to be a team right away that can give the Ville trouble. You guys mentioned earlier, you asked if you could take the Ville or the Field, who would you take? And you said you'd take the Field. I 100% back that on the full tournament. I do think the Ville or the Field in the regional. So
that's more of what I meant was when I was talking about the regional. Yeah,
that's interesting. Like will the Ville reach the Ville reaching the quarterfinal or the Field? I do think that would be like the Ville plus 700 and the Field would be like minus 300, just because of the statistics of one team versus, however many teams. But I don't hate that, question right there. I think they have the potential to get to that quarterfinal matchup, which is at Freedom Hall. And if you're at that point, the fans are into it. Like possibilities are endless if all of a sudden they're looking at themselves in that quarterfinal game at Freedom Hall, which will be one of the craziest, if not the craziest environments in TBT history. If the Air Raiders fly in from Lubbock to Louisville to play the Louisville team in Freedom Hall. I don't think it'll be too electric if it's, Gutter Cats versus the North Texas alumni in Freedom Hall. But if it'll be an awesome game. That would be a really cool matchup. But if it's Air Raiders versus the Ville from attendance standpoint will be, those Texas Tech fans will drive to Louisville for sure.
Yeah. It's a bit of a ways from West Texas to Louisville, but just like how Louisville would travel there, I think it's very, very similar. There's a certain faction of the fan base that's passionate and they'll attend almost anything. So I cannot wait to get into this and start watching TBT. There's so many fascinating storylines. Obviously, we're covering it more from the Louisville perspective, but overall, I think fans will enjoy watching, especially from your perspective in your bracket. Enjoying these teams, seeing some of the old familiar names. So I'm very interested in watching that. Andrew Zoldan, thank you so much for coming on. Tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, so you can follow me at Andrew Zoldan, which is Zoldan, but follow Inside TBT because that's where, all the TBT content from me is going to be coming out. Well, the TBT main account as well, of course, but you're probably if you're listening to a TBT podcast, you're probably already following the Ville and following at the tournament. So give at Inside TBT a follow. Post-game interviews. I'm going to Wichita. I'm going to have – it's actually a great place to follow Inside TBT because I won't be at every single Louisville game. So you'll get, kind of – if you're following the Ville and you're following Inside TBT, you'll get a lot of the the tournament. So
Yeah.
definitely give Inside TBT a follow. I want to come on and talk some regular Louisville basketball, some regular season Louisville basketball with you guys once the season's been. I got to find out how my backup big man's doing, come the season.
Is that more exciting than talking DePaul basketball?
DePaul basketball. I live in Chicago. I'm from Chicago, but I went to Mizzou. I have an Ohio State podcast. So those are my two teams. So if Louisville and Mizzou or Louisville and Ohio State ever match up, I'm your guy.
Let's go.
Let's
go. I love that. But being a Chicago native, though, just a little quick side note, and fans will, I think, appreciate this. Look up DePaul Day. Just get on your Google, type in DePaul Day, Louisville, and then and just enjoy the.
Yeah, that'll be your homework assignment for when you come back on the show. We'll have you on, and we'll just dissect your thoughts on DePaul Day, because it really is a fascinating concept here locally.
All right, I will look it up.
There you go, man.
I've heard of it, but I will look it up. I was actually in Louisville a few weeks ago. I came to do some stuff with Russ, which was so cool, and I was hanging out with him and Siva. Got to be in the gym with them. They look ready. Russ wakes up ready. Siva probably needs to stretch a little bit to get ready, but Russ literally wakes up ready. Like, I think he could roll out of bed, and as he's rolling out of bed, get a ball past to him and hit a three.
The next time you're on, we'll have to talk Russ stories. Because I'm sure this man's going to be pre-gaming at Waffle House 10 minutes before the game starts. So that's how he rolls. Andrew, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to hopefully chatting with you here soon, and look forward to following your coverage.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on.